So we're here today in the church that I work full-time at, the Refuge Church, in this kind of event space. So it's kind of got a stage and stuff like that and some windows over on this other side. So pretty much the first thing that I'm trying to do whenever I come into a location and we're shooting a testimony, obviously, is I'm trying to figure out what's the best angle that I can capture. So if we're limited to this space, just this room, then I'm kind of looking around at every angle. Where can I get the most like depth in the background, and where can I get the most interesting background? Because we could just go for like a blacked out room and put our subject like right in the middle, and then kind of make it just really isolated and not see any of the background. So that's an option, and we'll kind of look at that with lighting. But I do want to see if there's a cool background that I can use, and then I can actually light it and make it a little more visible than we otherwise would. So when we're just in here, we kind of have like a sound booth in the back, which is cool wood, but I don't know if I really want to show that. And then over here, there's like some bathrooms. Otherwise, that wall and the doors are cool, but then we have some more doors with windows on them, as well as exit signs, which are always tough because you can't really turn them off. So you're always going to get that red sign unless you want to remove it in editing. And then kind of some more doors, as well as like the stage and everything. And then this side, this wall is tough because there is a lot of like natural light, and luckily the shades are down, which is great. So I'm probably just going to try and like kind of ignore a lot of these windows. So I'm not going to need to like shape the light from the windows, because that is going to change. And a lot of testimonies we're filming for like 20 or 30 minutes at a time. And a lot of the window light outside can change even if the sun goes behind a cloud. It's just going to get darker. That's going to make things a lot harder. So probably going to avoid this side as well as back there with the bathrooms and stuff like that. So initially when I come in here, I think I'm going to try and aim primarily this way, maybe where we can cut off those doors, or at least a little bit of them, and the exit sign. And then part of the stage is fine. Even the projector is kind of cool in the background. But I think in this space, I'm going for something a little more neutral, and maybe I'm not going to highlight so much of the background just because it's just pretty typical like event space, which is great. But we'll look at how we can kind of work with what we have when we get more to lighting. So that's kind of what I'm thinking whenever I come into a space that we're going to be filming in. Really is just like, what can I use in the background, or do I want to use the background at all? So if there's a larger space like this, we do have the option of kind of isolating our subject a lot more and just kind of using it as like an infinite black shadowy background, which could be kind of cool. So the second thing that I'm going to do is using our position that we're going to focus on right now, is I'm going to set up 2 chairs, which we'll talk about why in a minute, but one for our subject and one for our interviewer per se, which is going to be me, and then our tripod, so we kind of get a shot set up right off the bat so we can see what it looks like even with all the overhead lights on, which it's going to look a lot better after we set up some lights, but we'll kind of get a base shot set up right away. Okay, so I have these 2 chairs. Now the big thing that I want to keep in mind is I'm going to be shooting off to the side of our subject, so they're not going to be looking directly at the camera, where if that was the case, I would just put the tripod looking straight in that direction, which I am going to do, but our position of our chairs and our tripod are going to be a little different. So I'm going to take our 2 chairs and probably put one of them like right around there for our subject, and then the other one kind of right here. So I'm going to be able to sit here and just talk to our subject that's going to be giving their testimony, and then then I'm going to try and position our tripod kind of here, so they're still looking off camera, but I'm going to be like looking at the background that we are wanting. So I'm going to grab my tripod, which is a pretty cheap tripod, but it works for the camera that I'm using. It's pretty light, so that's all right. So I'm kind of thinking like here, I'm going for like a medium to wide shot because I only have one camera. So I'm going to go probably knees up-ish, and then we can crop in and post and make a second camera out of it. But if I was using another camera, I would probably just put the tripod like here and then zoom in a lot closer on their face, maybe like shoulders up or something like that. But that's what we have to work with today. So I think that'll be pretty good right here. And I also love that we set up in a corner, because that's just going to get you a lot more depth looking to your subject instead of just looking at like a flat wall. We kind of got some lines like leading into the corner. So since the only camera we have is the one that I'm recording right now on, I'm just gonna kind of swap back and forth between the tripod, and then I'm gonna have my wife, who's gonna be giving her testimony today, sit down, and so we can kind of just right off the bat with the natural lights in this room from the ceiling, just kind of see where we're sitting at position wise, and maybe adjust a little bit from there, but then we'll bring in some lights and see how we can make it look even better. Okay, so just initially putting my camera on the tripod, I can tell we already want to zoom in a good bit, as well as probably raise up a little bit, because I always want my camera to be positioned almost directly at their eye line, depending on the angle, obviously. So I'm gonna raise up just a little bit, maybe like that. And then I'm gonna zoom in. We're filming the behind the scenes at like 24 millimeters. So maybe we'll come into like 35 or a little more, something like that. And then I'm gonna come up just a little bit to kind of position her on like the right third, since she's gonna be looking frame left at me sitting down. That's gonna give us like a good, decent camera one, camera A shot. And then now we're gonna bring in some lights and then see how we can make this look even better. So we talked about quite a few lighting setups back in the pre-production section of this lesson of the testimony shoot. So I'm just gonna kind of show a few of those and kind of show the results that you can get. This is kind of the setup that I have right now. So one 4-foot Quasar light tube, which is bi-color, so it's adjustable. A few C-stands, a light stand and stuff. And then I have a Amaran 200X, which is pretty bright, as well as like a light dome and stuff. So we'll show that all in a minute, but this is a super versatile setup for testimonies. You can do a ton with just 2 or 3 lights, which is kind of what we're gonna work with today. The first one that I wanted to show is this 4-foot Quasar light tube. These things are awesome. I like to position them horizontally. Very professionally rigged here with Velcro cable ties. Ideally, we would probably have like a super clamp or something to actually kind of hold it onto the C-stand, but this works just fine for today. So this is where I'm gonna kind of bring it over. So I know right off the bat, immediately when I come into any shoot, is I'm gonna have our subject's eye line facing this chair, obviously, and I'm gonna have my camera placed on one of their sides, could be either one, doesn't matter. And then I'm gonna have our main bright key light coming from the other side. And I'll show you what kind of the difference is, but mainly I just wanna be lighting the, on the opposite side that I'm filming on. So I'm filming the shadow side of their face, so you don't have that like phone flashlight, like direct light kind of effect. And so if the light's coming from over here and you're filming from this side, you're gonna get those nice like shadows on their subject's face, which is awesome. This is super basic, but this is how I set up. So I'm gonna plug this in real quick, and then we'll kind of see what this tube looks like. And then obviously we always wanna use our sandbags on C-stands. You always put it on the tallest leg so that it is, all the weight is on there. If you put it on one of the shorter ones, it kind of leans on the ground and kind of loses the effect. So sandbag, tallest leg. Now you're not gonna hit your subject with your light in the middle of the shoot. Before I switch this on, I do definitely want to, oh shoot, that's not working. Dang it. So before I actually switch on our Quasar light tube over here, I do wanna turn the house lights off, because I just wanna see what it looks like with pretty much no lights on, and then we'll just turn this on to see kind of what it looks like. So pretty bright, and then I can adjust the color temperature over here. I like to put these at like 4400. And then I'm gonna go ahead and put the camera on the tripod and have our interviewee sit down so we can actually see what this looks like. All right, with our camera put in the exact same position, all the lights are off, so the only light we have is our Quasar tube light on. And I can already see it's just a little bright on her face. Obviously we can adjust that with like our ISO or something, but we're getting like a little more shadow on the far side of her face than I'd kind of want. So I'm just gonna slide it towards the camera a little bit to kind of eliminate some of those shadows. Okay, that looks a little better. So that's not bad. I honestly may just bring it in to her just a little bit, because obviously the closer it is to our subject, the bigger it is kind of gonna appear. So that's gonna obviously give us a softer light the further we are in, and then we can obviously take our exposure down, and that's not bad. So if you're kind of looking to where I would be sitting, then I would say this is pretty good. So we could even move around, zoom in for like a closer shot. I mean, at the very least, like this is lit. There's obviously a lot more that we can do to it, but this just goes to show you can get some really cool results just from a simple light tube, which is about $100. Now let's also see kind of what this looks like if I scoot it a little further away, get some more shadow on her face. So that's obviously going to give us a little moodier look. Now I also may come up with this a little more, so we're kind of coming from above, which is generally more flattering than lighting someone's face from below their face or their eye line. That's not bad. That's going to give us like kind of a more dramatic look for our interview, but we are kind of getting a cool like Rembrandt look from her, the shadow side of her cheek. So I would record with this if I only had one light. This is probably the best result. I like this. It's a little more dramatic. We're not getting a ton of light in the background, which is nice because I don't want it to be completely blown out. I want to keep the focus on our subject here, and she is like the brightest thing in the frame. So I think that's great. All right, so obviously we're also not going to use this close of a shot because I did want to go a little wider and have the ability to crop in. So maybe something like that is what we'll actually go with. And I think that looks pretty good. Now we're going to kind of continue to build on this, but I wanted to at least show you the kind of results you could get with just a $100 4-foot adjustable light tube, and I don't think that's too bad. But once we have a kind of a wider shot like this, you can see already a lot of the light is coming in on the ground behind her. So you can see there's a lot of spread. There's pretty much no directionality from the light, which is really the big issue with these light tubes. One is that they're only soft in one direction because they're really thin and horizontal or vertical depending on where you put it. But the other issue with it is it's really hard to focus the light in one specific spot. So right now we're kind of just getting this giant beam of light that's around the whole area. So we're going to talk about a few other methods of lighting that's going to give you a little more directionality, as well as what I'm actually going to do to light this scene and give it a little more contrast and make it a little more interesting for our testimony. Okay, so since we still have our Quasar tube set up, I wanted to really quick show kind of how I would shoot this with a very little budget. And that would be obviously as this has a key light because it's going to give us some nice soft shadows, at least horizontally, which I think is more important. So you could obviously put it vertically, but I don't like that. I think then you got really harsh shadows like this way. And since we're kind of shooting horizontally, that's kind of how I like to do it. And then the only other thing I would add is a backlight, which is huge. You'll definitely see the difference when I put the camera on it, but this is just a little Aperture MC, which is awesome because it's battery powered and magnetic and full RGB color, anything you want. But I just have it set to like a white balance, which is just 3200 Kelvin. I like to have my backlight or hair light, whatever you want to call it, warmer than my key light. I just think it has a nice kind of cool orange glow and adds that to our subject. I'm going to kind of position this, probably it's kind of similar height right now, but I'm going to try and position this higher than our key lights because mainly we want to like kind of light the top of our subject's head and a little bit of their body, like kind of outline them in a nice light on the back. And what this is really going to do, and what you hear people say all the time, is just to separate our subject a little more from the background, which is huge. So it's going to add a little more depth, some more contrast, as well as some color contrast because it's going to be different than our main key light. So this is kind of how I have it positioned right now. Our subject is almost directly in between our backlight and our key light. So that's kind of how I like to do it because then this is on the same side of our subject as the camera, and I like to just see more of the backlight. But people kind of have differing opinions. You can put it on the same side as the key light, which would just be over on this side essentially. I find that's harder because we're kind of dealing with the camera, so you can put it here, but I like to put it on the direct opposite side. That's just going to give us a little more contrast because our lights are in kind of opposing directions and really kind of back behind our subject. So looking at it now, I think I'm going to scoot it a little farther back because what I don't want is that little light to come around and highlight our subject's nose. I don't think that's really good. So with our subject like sitting down right here, we kind of want to hit the side outline of them as well as like kind of the top of their hair or top of their head. So maybe something like that. I'll probably come back just a little bit more like there and then raise up just a little bit. We can obviously kind of tilt this down, but I want to get it a little higher and add a little more contrast from above. So that's kind of my thought. We'll adjust it a little bit once we put the camera on, but I'm going to go ahead and turn off all of our house lights again and just turn these two on. Okay, so starting again from scratch, just really quick so we can kind of build each light on. The only light we kind of have is this bluish light from outside from the windows. So I'm going to go ahead and switch our main key light on. So we've got a setup just like we did just a minute ago, but again, no backlight. So I'm going to go ahead and turn our backlight on and see what kind of difference we're making. So it's pretty subtle. It's not probably as different of a color as I'd like it. Sometimes you can do kind of fun stuff, but it's at about half brightness right now. So we can either obviously increase our brightness or we can move it closer. So I'll probably do a little mixture of both. I'm going to move our light in a little closer and probably a little more off to the side of our subject, because I don't necessarily want it to just be a hair light and just have it behind her. I kind of want it to wrap around. I think that's looking a little bit better. That's giving us just a little bit of contrast and a little bit of outline here on her right side, on the frame right side. So you can see if we're off, it's pretty isolated, but then if we're back on, you can see just a little bit of highlight on that right side. So we can even play with some cool different colors, like a blue or something. And then we also have some different colors actually in the house lights, which is neat. So just goes to show figuring out kind of what you're working with can be really huge. So even kind of like a blue light might be kind of cool. Probably not a dark red or orange or something like that, but maybe like a light blue or something that'll kind of match her pants would be neat. So maybe something like that. That could be cool. We can also just go like orange, which is kind of similar to like our just regular like lower tungsten orange. It's not super bright. I would probably bring in like a little brighter light, but that'll work pretty well for now. So how about right now, let's go for like a lighter blue in like a lower intensity. All right, so that's not looking bad. I'm actually probably gonna go see some of the other colors that we have available just in the room, because I think that can sometimes add a cool look. Probably a little too blue, so I probably won't do that, but it is kind of matching the color that we are backlighting with. So just some more options. I would always like kind of look at what you have available in the room, but I'll just stick with our main lights off right now and just kind of our 2-light setup. So let's see if we can get this just a little bit brighter by moving it in a little bit. It's kind of just off to the side. If I zoom out here for a second, kind of see where we are. I think that's cool. I kind of like the blue look. That's kind of neat. So that is something we could run with. We're going to keep kind of adding to this setup. But that's how I would kind of light a scene if we could just have 2 lights. One can be really small as a backlight, because we don't necessarily need a huge soft light, but the other one I would try and make soft, at least horizontally. So a light tube can work really well for that. Kind of moving along in our lighting progression. Now, I hope at least a lot of that is helpful. I didn't initially intend to kind of include all that extra information. That's not how we're actually going to shoot the testimony, but I hope at least that's kind of helpful to you. So moving along, this is actually what we're going to shoot the testimony with, this light. This is my Amaran 200X, which is an amazing light. I would say one of the best value lights out there, because it's really bright and it's also bicolor, so color temperature adjustable basically. And then I have a Light Dome 2 from Aperture, which is great. I think these are awesome. They're easy to set up and also really big. So it's going to give us some nice soft light. It's not quite as long as our 4-foot Quasar light tube, but it is bigger in all sorts of directions, so it's a little better in that regard. Now obviously you can see it's just completely flat on the front, and I like to always use the more diffused fabric that comes with this. There's like a thinner one, but our 200X has plenty of power, so I'm going to use the bigger diffusion that's going to be a little bit softer. So with this, I always like to kind of angle these down just a little bit. We can always change it, but you can see I'm starting off just a little bit down. So I'm going to put this really similar to where our light tube was. And obviously, pretty much the closer I can get it to my subject, the better. Obviously, that's just not going to be in camera. That's kind of the goal, but I'm probably going to try and move it even closer. If I go up enough, probably still tilt down a little bit, because I'd definitely rather be, like we talked about a minute ago, lighting kind of from the top than even straight on. It's just going to give us a nice, lot more pleasing shadows on our subject's face. So sometimes, honestly, it's easier for me to just sit down in the chair, because I'm going to be able to easily see where our light is pointing. So I can see kind of where we are right now. I know we definitely can probably come in more for sure. So somewhere like there, that might not be a really bad position. Now, I definitely want to keep the similar setup that we had, which is really just like our main key light, which is going to be big and nice and diffused, as well as a backlight. And from what we've covered already, we have 3 lights essentially, and they're all for different various purposes. This light dome is the best for a key light, obviously, because it's going to be the biggest. We have our quasar tube as well as our little aperture MC. So I'm kind of going to play around and see what works best with this. I'd love for the light tube to be a nice backlight because it is kind of big, but my worry is that it's going to be a little too bright for a backlight, and it's just going to completely like wash out our frame with light. So it's possible we'll use our MC as a backlight, but let's kind of see at least how our light dome looks on camera before we get into that. And we'll just kind of start building back on with our light dome instead of the tube light. Now just 8% and at 6,500 Kelvin, so I'm gonna turn that down to like 53 or 54. Just is softer all around, honestly, especially vertically because the tube is just so thin. So I'm gonna just kind of play with the position just a little bit. The white balance on my camera is adjusted to the room right now, which is a little bluer, I would say. So I'm just kind of gonna adjust this one. Generally, in my experience, warmer light just looks better on people than colder light. All right, so right there, we're at like 4,500 Kelvin, and that's a good middle point just for where our camera white balance is at right now, and that's pretty decent. So that's pretty nice. I think I honestly may bring it back out just a little bit, which is just part of the process is just kind of moving lights around because it's really hard to, even if you know what you're gonna set up lighting wise, you're always like kind of moving it around slightly to get exactly what you're wanting. Obviously, the closer that it is to her, the softer it's gonna be, which is our goal. So that's looking pretty good. I'm just gonna zoom in to see kind of what our like close-up shot is, which is looking really good. So maybe I'll leave that there as we play with our backlight so I can kind of see how it's looking on the back of her. Our light dome is super low brightness right now, so we can give it obviously a lot more, but let's kind of see the balance that we're working with since these quasar tubes aren't dimmable, which is kind of tough. So it's not quite as bright as I was initially thinking it's going to be. Now, another super important thing to remember is that we're always kind of going to work away from the things that we can't control. So right now, like that quasar light tube is a pretty good distance in the back. If I zoom all the way out, kind of see where we are position wise. We have our big key light right here, and then over there we have our tube light all the way in the back. So say we can't go any further, what we can do to make that light appear brighter, quote unquote, is to actually raise the brightness of our light dome. So then we can lower our in-camera exposure, and that's gonna make everything kind of seem darker. So let's go up with our brightness on our light dome here. Then we can go down on our exposure in camera. Zoom back in a little bit, and you can see with the before and after that our backlight is actually a whole lot dimmer. So honestly, at this point, I'm thinking I may even bring this in just a little bit just because we got so much brightness back. So right now I'm probably like half the distance, and I'm actually gonna see if we can go a little warmer just because I think it's a cool look, and then I'm gonna probably double the height as well. Don't forget sandbags. Cool, I think that's great. Right away, I'm gonna try and move our light a little further just so you can kind of see where we're working with right now. I think I'm gonna try and move our light tube behind her a little bit more, so it's gonna get a little more of the top of her head and a little bit less on the side. Since we're a little higher, I think that'll work a little bit better. Maybe like there, let's see how that looks. I think that's nice. I think we will probably go with that. I think that'll be really cool. So we got kind of a nice warm light on the side of her face. So you can see kind of on the ground, we have a lot of spill happening. So a lot from like our warm quasar light in the background, and then a lot from our main key light. And I can't solve that from the quasar unless I had another light, but I can from our key light. And that's gonna be actually using a grid or an egg crate or whatever it is you wanna call it, that I'm gonna put up in front of here that's gonna basically just direct the light extremely focused forward, and it's gonna help it to not spill all over the room. So essentially, if I'm standing like right here, I can still see the light. So that light is still gonna hit me, but I'm gonna quickly throw this up and you'll kind of see the difference. All right, pretty quick and easy. So you can see right away, if I'm standing in the same spot, I'm not seeing nearly as much of the light as I was a second ago. So even on the ground, I can see I'm barely getting any light spill on the ground. It's really just a lot more focused kind of around the chair and a lot around our subject, which is the goal. For this, it's even more important for the light to be focused directly on our subject because you're not going to get a lot of spill to the outside. So let's see what the difference looks like on camera. Yeah, so I can see straight away we're getting a lot more like focused light. We're not seeing a lot more around her. So this is gonna really isolate her a lot. If I turn off our backlight here, you can see just how dark the rest of the frame is, which is a really interesting look. So again, just different kind of techniques for you to consider. For this shoot, I'm gonna throw back on the backlight because I always want that little outline around our subject. I think the key light is in a pretty good spot. I think I honestly may raise our ISO just a little bit. I think I'm gonna move back our tube light a little more. Now this is always the battle because I always feel like I need to just keep adjusting stuff. But at some point you kind of gotta call it good and go ahead and film. All right, so as we kind of wrap up the lighting, because I'm pretty happy with how we are, at least right now, just with a nice key light and a nice backlight, I am gonna throw our little aperture MC, which is the third light that we have available. And I'm gonna kind of use this as a background light. So this one is great for background light, honestly. It's pretty much perfect because it's completely adjustable as well as battery powered and magnetic. So it's pretty much the perfect light just to be able to throw anywhere in our frame. But I kind of just want to add a little bit of color into the background and try and make it a little more interesting. So let's kind of see if this will work or not. So let's go ahead and flip it on. I think we're still to like a nice blue. So I'll increase like our saturation. Maybe we use this cool blue. Bring the intensity down a little bit. Maybe I even set it somewhere a little off frame. Just shining like some blue light into the background. So we're just barely in frame here, so I'm gonna scoot our stand back a little bit. All right, I think that's actually kind of cool. I might go with that. It's not a super motivated light per se because it is blue and we only have like an orange light coming from the background. But I think it'll help just to add a little bit of visual interest. I might move it up a little bit just towards our backlight, so we're not getting any kind of crazy shadows on like the door handle or anything like that. Yeah, that's cool. That adds just a little bit. You can also obviously swap our background light with our backlight, just depending on the kind of look you're going for. But I would say this is a really solid 3-light setup for a testimony. So now that we've got our lighting pretty much dialed in, we're gonna start working on audio, which hopefully will not take as long as lighting, that's for sure. Really, all that I'm working with here is I just have a C-stand that I'm gonna use to hold up our boom pole. So overall, I'm gonna set up a shotgun mic on a boom pole. So boom mic, aim that at our subject as close as possible. A lot of what we talked about in the audio section. And then I'm gonna use the lav mic that I'm wearing right now just so you can hear me onto her so that we can actually kind of have two sources as a backup just in case anything happens with either of them, as well as just in case one of them sounds better, because sometimes these shotgun mics pick up a lot more noise in the room, which I kind of want to avoid. What I'm gonna do first is position our C-stand that we're gonna use to mount our boom pole on. So what I like to do with this is go a little bit to the side of our camera, because this can kind of be wherever. Some people go more like straight on, but really what we can do is come out with our boom pole and kind of mount it on here and just angle it down. So we don't need to like come here and like angle it forward. So that's kind of what I like doing more, is going more like here and just coming in from the side. So let's go ahead and do this. Now there are specific like boom pole holders, which I haven't messed with a ton, but I do really like this solution that I have here, which is just a boom pole as well as like a pretty cheap boom pole holder. These are like 20-30 bucks or something like that. And these can just go in the C-stands that hopefully you already have. So we're nice and sturdy, and then throw a sandbag on there. And then our boom pole, which is just gonna kind of sit in there like that. So all the weight's gonna be on this end, pretty basic. Extend this out, and as I extend it, I like to give it a little more room in the back. The mic that we're using today is the one that I just recently got, but I think it's probably the best value shotgun mic you can get because it's super versatile. This is the Sennheiser MKE 600, I think, or MKH or something like that. So it's XLR. It can be mounted on your camera, or it can be mounted to a boom pole or something like that, as well as you can put a battery in it if you don't have phantom power. So overall, just super versatile. But I'm going to be plugging it into my Zoom H5 for today, which is just straight XLR. So I can see right away, like if I sit down in here, It's not in a bad position. I know I want to angle it a little more this way, as well as probably get it up because that might be in the camera frame. Now it's a lot easier to mount these if the camera is actually on our tripod and we can see the frame, because really I'm just trying to get this as close as possible without actually being in the camera. So that's a good starting place at least. I think we're gonna have to just raise up a little bit and then just angle a little more towards the middle of our chair. And then all I'm gonna do next is just kind of wrap an XLR cable down the pole so it's not hanging in the way of anything. And then I have our Zoom H5, which is an awesome recorder, probably one of my favorites in Zoom's lineup just because it's pretty simple. There's no crazy like menu interface or anything like that. It's really basic, but anyway, it's just a simple recorder that can do pretty much everything you need, and it's pretty cheap. So that's kind of my favorite. That's the one that I'm always using, and a really cheap tripod because you never know when you need a cheap tripod, and they come in handy pretty much for this exact purpose, just so I can sit there. So I'll probably kind of position this one somewhere like there, just so I can see while I'm sitting there interviewing if either our camera or my mic cuts off, or if they end up like peaking on the audio. I want to see that right away. So just being able to position it somewhere within the field of view is nice. I like to kind of plug the mic in first and then run our cable so I don't get a whole bunched up cable all the way at the mic. And this mic is phantom powered, so I have a battery in there, but the mic itself is switched off because it's going to be pulling phantom power from our input on our recorder. So we can see right away, I don't think we're getting any signal. That's just because our input 1 is selected, so I'll just select input 2, and then we're definitely getting a good level there. So we'll go ahead and adjust this a little more once we have our interviewee sit back down and get a good audio level for actually her dialogue, because I could sit there and talk, but that's not going to be accurate for what we're actually trying to capture. And then the last thing in audio is, I think I mentioned, but I'm just going to hook up my lav mic to her, just so we have 2 sources of audio. Typically lav mics, I would say, tend to be a little more dry. There's not a lot of like room noise, which can be a good thing, but it also can be a little more isolated kind of. So our shotgun mic's going to give us that full room noise, and sometimes I even like to kind of mix both of them in post. So we'll talk about that whenever we get to editing this testimony. But yeah, that's kind of my thought process. I like to have 2 different ones just so we have a different sound for each in case one and also in case one dies. So always good to have a backup. So I think that is pretty much wrapping up our audio. The only other things I'm going to do is just set our level for our lav mic as well as our shotgun mic to sit kind of below -6 to -12 dB in general. So if anybody like kind of gets excited and goes up in volume, then we're gonna have a little bit of leeway in there. And then I also always have headphones on set because I'm always either wearing them or at least wearing them to test. But having somebody wear headphones is always really helpful, just really so you can hear what's happening. I'll kind of wear them for a few minutes as we test out audio and stuff to see if any mic is making like a buzzing sound or something just crazy. But also I try to wear them while we're recording as well, in case like an AC kicks on or something like that, or there's like a loud noise outside that you can actually hear. I want to know that in the moment so I can go ahead and have our subject like repeat what they just said. That's pretty much it. So headphones always good to have so you can listen to your mics before and during while you're recording. Okay, so before we actually get into the interview, I promise that's coming here in a minute. I just have a few things that I want to talk about. I just vaguely named this the art of the interview because testimonies that I filmed are really just interviews. I'm really kind of just trying to sit across from the person, have a conversation, and draw their story out, make them feel comfortable, all those things. So I have a few notes that I wanted to share that kind of relate to the art of the interview as to how I ask questions. Just some more theory-based stuff on talking about filming interviews. So first one, which is probably the most key thing, is to be fully present. This is exactly why I plan out questions, because I don't want to be thinking, just like in a normal conversation, I don't want to be thinking about what my next question is going to be, what I want to ask about what she just said. I want to keep that to a minimum. I want to plan out my questions pre-interview, like we talked about, have a good idea of their story beforehand, so I'm not sitting there trying to think of my next question. I want to actually be listening, engaging, and active listening, right? Just in a normal conversation. And the next one I know I've talked about before, but definitely have you or someone else sit down and interview them. I like to do it personally just because I am going to be the one editing most of the time, and so I can just immediately know what's going to be a good clip, how I'm going to kind of cut this together. But if you have like a director on set or something, maybe they're going to want to do it. So that's totally fine, but just having somebody sit there and talk to them, I found 90% of the time is very helpful, and the other 10% of the time people kind of have their story like memorized, and if they're just going off of memory, sometimes they don't want to be looking directly at someone. Sometimes they just need to like stare at the wall and just recite from memory, which is generally doesn't give the best results. It's not the most natural thing, but that can happen sometimes. The next thing, which we'll talk about in a second once we actually sit down, the only rule that I give people beforehand before we actually start filming is to just answer in complete sentences to the best of your ability. Now, I try to gear my questions that I've come up with to be open-ended. I'm not looking for any yes or no answers for sure, but I rarely in final edits of testimonies include my questions. I know that's kind of a documentary style, and I have a few times, but generally I just want them to speak and share their story, so I'm trying to have them answer in complete sentences so you don't need to hear my question. So really that's just restating the question within their answer. So that's kind of the only direction that I give them before we start filming, and a few other quick ones. Help them feel comfortable, whatever they need. Just kind of be cool, calm, and collected on set. I wouldn't try and rush around, at least when your talent shows up, trying to set stuff up, because it's just going to make them even more nervous. So try and be relatively calm and comfortable. Your job is primarily just to draw their story out and not try and add or subtract anything away from it. Your job is really just to draw their story out and not add too much into that with your own discussion. So I would try and just focus just on them. All right, and then the very last tip that I want to share as far as just interviewing goes is to ask follow-up questions. Come up with some on the spot if you can, which is why we prepare with questions, so we can be spontaneous and come up with questions on the spot, have a real dialogue and discussion with our subject. This gives a much more natural feel, and do your best to kind of hone in on interesting things. That's the whole reason why I'm trying to sit across from my interviewee, for my subject, even for testimonies, because I do want to try and ask questions, dive deeper into things that I want to hear more about. So stuff like that, all with kind of keeping the edit in mind, since I'm going to be the one editing. So that's super helpful.
Like, should I pause between thoughts if I'm trying to think? Like, is it better to, if you ask me a question and I'm trying to piece together like 3 different thoughts, do I wait till I say all of them, or do I like start with my first thought and then pause when I'm thinking of the next thing and then keep going?
As far as like editing goes, it's much easier to have like a larger gap, so don't be afraid if you need like to take a second to just like to sit and think and then just kind of go back into what you're talking about. That's totally fine. I would rather you do that than try and like just stumble through into the next thought.
Okay.
So don't be afraid if you need to like take breaks or anything like that. With B-roll capture, I kind of just shot all the B-roll that I needed to get, but I figured it would be a little bit easier just to talk about it after the fact, and I'll kind of show some on screen as I'm talking about it. But really, I'm just trying to find stuff that kind of loosely relates to their story, and even if it's different, like I got some shots of the trees out here, so it just kind of relates to the B-roll, but it doesn't necessarily relate to her story specifically. Just capturing anything like that I think could be cool, just to kind of supplement her story and just provide some visual breakup just from her sitting down and talking directly at me or at the camera or anything like that. So a big thing for this, I shoot all interviews in 24 frames per second or 23.976 like we've talked about. And then any B-roll and stuff, I've shot some in 24 frames before, but typically I just shoot in 60 frames per second, so I can slow that down 40% to then match my 24 frames per second final output and our A-roll that I shot. So that's typically what I do, so I can do 40% slow motion, and then that'll give us some nice smoothness, and it'll also smooth out some of the shots, even though I was just handheld because I kind of like that look, but being able to slow it down is going to help us stabilize some of those extra jerky movements and stuff like that. So I just kind of shot some of her reading her Bible, sitting outside, journaling a little bit, as well as her just kind of sitting looking at the sky. So I think it's pretty generic. It's nothing crazy, but just kind of help our story. And I know she mentioned one specific verse in Psalms, so I captured that in her Bible, which I think will be really cool to incorporate around that exact time. So all I was really trying to capture with B-roll is just some nice smooth shots. I like incorporating some motion in my shots, so that's kind of just me locking down the camera and just kind of moving back and forth slowly, so I just get a little bit of movement, and also putting some stuff in the foreground so we get just some nice depth in our shots as we're like seeing her journal or something, and then putting another chair or a little bush or something in the foreground just to make shots a little more interesting, something like that. And obviously capture a variety of like really close-ups as well as some wider establishing shots so you can kind of see where the scene is that we're sitting. Sometimes I'll light B-roll shots, it kind of depends, but oftentimes like today it's pretty cloudy and kind of overcast, so the lighting is obviously like extremely soft and diffused just naturally, so I didn't really touch lighting at all today and just wanted to capture something kind of quick. All right, that's all I got as it relates to B-roll for this testimony. I'm gonna cover one more thing back inside, and then we're gonna get into editing. All right, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, first of all, I applaud you for sticking it with me for this long. And secondly, there's a lot more to this video. I go through the entire editing process of this entire video, how I cut down the content, how I color grade, and how I edit the audio, plus a ton more you can access completely for free. Just click the link down in the description. You can go to the page for my course and access this entire video completely for free. And thanks for sticking around with me again, and I can't wait to keep helping you make better church videos.
I remember accepting Jesus at a young age, so my life before Christ, I can't remember a lot of it, but I do remember the moment of salvation, even though I'm pretty sure I was only like 5. It was really young. But I remember being in the car with my parents, and I grew up in a Christian home. I knew who Jesus was from church and from talking with them, but I knew I hadn't accepted him as my savior. And I remember being in the car, driving with my parents, I'm not sure where, but I remember thinking, I know I need Jesus, and I know I'm not perfect, and I know that I need a savior, and I know what Jesus has done for me, and I want my life to be for him. And I remember going home that night and knowing that I wanted to be in heaven with the Lord, and kind of having a really like childlike understanding of salvation. But I remember praying with my mom and asking Jesus to come into my heart, and kind of marking that day as like, this is my commitment to follow God. In middle school and high school, I was still feeling like I was having a hard time feeling that closeness to God, and I hadn't quite hit college yet where I felt that deep transformative change. And so I was struggling with self-confidence, I was struggling with friendships. I felt stuck in sinful habits that I didn't want to do, but kept making poor decisions, and felt frustrated and honestly even angry with God. Like, why are you allowing this to happen to me? Why can't I get out of these sinful habits that I'm doing? And I just felt like I didn't have a lot of hope in that way. And it wasn't until that first year of college when I really started to own my faith and I really started pursuing Jesus that the Lord shared with me a truth that I will probably never forget. And it was just this idea of, it's not that I just don't want to sin. It's not that I just don't want to do these things. Instead, I have to replace that with a desire for godliness. And I have to replace that with seeking the Lord. And that my relationship with him, as I pursue that, I just don't want the sin as much. And I don't want to do the things that are against God's heart. It really changed my life in that way, and led me to one of my favorite verses of probably all time, I think. But in Psalms 37:4, it says, "Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." And it's really easy. It's one of those verses you could just look at and say, oh, like, God's just gonna give you anything you want. He's like a genie. He'll just give you whatever your heart desires. See, God's not just gonna give you any desire that you have in your heart, but really if you take delight in the Lord, if you enjoy spending time in His presence, if you are excited to grow closer to Jesus, He will change your heart. I've learned a lot even in the past few years since that really defining moment in my first year of college. Life isn't always easy, but God does promise to be with us through it. And so even when I walk through hard things with friendships or relationships, I saw how God was just present with me and drew me closer and taught me things. And even in this last year of teaching, first grade, it's hard, it's not always easy, and that has been something that is really difficult to walk through, even as a Christian. It's easy to think that life's just gonna be better because you have God, and it is better, but it's just not always easier. And so I think I've learned to continue to trust God even in the hard moments, and I'm just confident that He is not gonna stop working in me. He's not gonna stop helping me look more like Him as I pursue my walk with Him.